Mr. Chairman and members of the judiciary, I'd like to first say I gave my experience out to the clerk to show what my past has been with my careers, as well as the Michigan State Police, teaching in public education, and so forth. And also my experience with criminal civil asset forfeiture. I spent 26 years with the Michigan State Police, and after I retired, I spent 14 years in public education teaching criminal justice to high school students, and I also taught adjunct faculty at several community colleges in Michigan. So my interest in criminal justice has gone over 40 years of my career. And the reason I'm here today is because I still have an interest in criminal justice. I have several students that I've had that are in criminal justice as law enforcement professionals, as narcotic officers, as lawyers. All over this country, I have students that are working in this criminal justice field. My brother was a trooper. My other brother was a deputy. My brother-in-law was the chief of police. I have two nephews that are in law enforcement. I'm from a law enforcement family, and I believe totally in law enforcement, the integrity and trust that has to accompany law enforcement to be successful. My first introduction to CAF, if you don't mind me referring to it as CAF, Civil Asset Forfeiture, was when I was assigned to the Criminal Investigation Division headquarters on a new drug team that was formed called Interdiction and Conspiracy Enforcement. It was known as ICE. That was before Customs changed their name to ICE. We had an Interdiction and Conspiracy Enforcement team. There was 5 officers on that team, including myself, 1 lieutenant and 4 sergeants. Our mission was to interdict drugs, incoming drugs and outgoing cash, to and from Michigan airports, parcel carriers, bus, train, commercial carriers, trying to interdict the drugs coming into Michigan and the money going out of Michigan. We would go to, we were trained at Chicago O'Hare Airport and Wayne County Airport by DEA. We were to do consensual searches at airports of people by talking to them, we walked up to them, introduced who we were, and we tried to ascertain whether or not they were mules, basically, and to get consent to search their luggage. And that sounds funny to go up to somebody and ask them if they're carrying drugs, but you'd be surprised that most people in the airport feel that they don't have the rights that they normally have in the public eye. So they were very often allowed us to search their luggage. The other mission that we had was to investigate large-scale narcotic conspiracy cases, and we were to team up with other agencies such as Michigan State Police, multi-jurisdictional drug teams, cities, counties, and the federal government to take down the top tier of drug organizations rather than going after the users or the small-time drug people. We were supposed to go after the higher-level dealers. I received a lot of training in civil asset forfeiture through the United States government, the Bureau of Justice. They gave us training. I also attended the Michigan Department of Treasury tax school for 14 weeks, 4 days a week, to learn about sales and use tax. And I'll tell you more about that and why we were trained in that. I was also trained in analytical investigation methods so that we could keep track and chart large-scale narcotic conspiracy cases. With departmental approval, I developed a curriculum for civil asset forfeiture and consent search training. I first brought this to the multi-jurisdictional drug teams, teaching to try to make a standardized understanding of the civil asset forfeiture law and what it was to be used for and what its intent was. I did find that talking to some of the drug teams, that some of the drug teams were basically unloading houses on search warrants for drugs, and this was before medical marijuana, so this was all drugs were illegal at this time. And they basically emptied houses out. And basically, if they needed a couch for their office, they would take a couch. If they thought it could generate some revenue, they'd take that. And them and the prosecutor would make a deal with the criminal case and would negotiate the property and the criminal case. In my opinion, at that particular time, and I still hold that opinion, that was not what the forfeiture law was intended to do. But me being a detective sergeant and training people who were lieutenants and above, as well as the officers, they were running their own operation with the consent of the prosecuting attorney's office in those jurisdictions. I then was on a program called Operation Pipeline. This was a program that was developed to teach all uniformed troopers, as well as other departments and prosecutors, how vehicles were transporting drugs and proceeds back and forth across the state. So my role was to teach criminal asset forfeiture, civil asset forfeiture, and consent search on traffic stops. I personally believe that both drugs and cash have to be moved physically from one location to another location, and they are meant to be exchanged. So that makes it so that these drugs and cash are moved around the state. And there's only so many ways you can move them. My job was to make officers aware of this and how to interdict the movement of money and drugs. And I felt I was performing a great service to my department and to my community and to the citizens of this state as part of the drug war. Many officers would seize money on traffic stops, and they would call me because I was the go-to person for the Michigan State Police on asset forfeiture. I was the person who was doing the training. I was the one who was getting calls from different officers from around the state. They seized money. They wanted to know what they should do with it. I would ask them what the circumstances were, and then I would open up an investigation on that. If I determined shortly after the money was taken that there was no nexus to drugs, I would tell them to return the money to the person. Do not. I had one case where over $400,000 was found in a truck, a commercial truck, and the guy had it in a suitcase, and he said he didn't believe in banks, and the state police seized it, and they called me and said, what can we do with it? I did a quick investigation, determined as much as I could about this individual. I said, give it back. I see no nexus. I see nothing that indicates. And back then, we used to do drug sniffs, but drug sniffs on money basically is worthless. Dogs can't testify, and all dogs can do is react. So you can't call a dog to the stand. So I felt dog hits alone were not sufficient to indicate drugs, the money was involved with drugs. I taught forfeiture after I left the narcotics unit. I was in investigative resources. I was involved in training of narcotic officers and field detectives. I continue to teach at recruit schools forfeiture.
I think we've got a lot more cards to go. If you can get to kind of the core of the bill, and if you support the bill, what is the thinking behind that?
Okay. After I retired from the state police, I was into teaching, and several things happened over a period of time, and that is, and I'll just briefly say that the Bennis case in Michigan has something to do with innocent owners and the 5th and 14th Amendment regarding due process and forfeiture. Medical marijuana laws came into play. Wayne County and their Operation Push-Off, nuisance abatement cases were hitting the papers quite a bit. 18 cities in Michigan had decriminalized the possession of marijuana. There was a lot of issues when it came to medical marijuana, as you all know. So how did this affect civil asset forfeiture? Some cities allowed dispensaries, even though there was nothing in the state law to allow dispensaries, but cities allowed them. The police would come in and raid them and take their assets. Medical marijuana providers would either commit a technical violation, and there would be search warrants and assets would be seized. Why do I think there needs to be a change or to eliminate civil asset forfeiture? Law enforcement is an extremely important vocation in our society. Trust and service to the public is as important today as it was yesterday. I have devoted over 40+ years serving the public as a law enforcement officer and as a public school teacher, helping to nurture and provide future law enforcement officers and criminal justice professionals. I believe that the policy and procedures of CAF erodes the trust and is perceived to incentivize law enforcement. The vast majority of officers in our state do an outstanding job, and I'm not blaming them for doing what they think they're supposed to be doing. Only you, the representatives of the people, can make changes necessary that will provide oversight that will take CAF out of the shadows and into the light. Over time, our departments and officers will gain respect and trust by the citizens for the public servants that we are.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the committee? Apparently not, so thank you very much for your testimony.